going to do something a little bit different on this test drive. Most of the time I'm driving maybe 100 miles into the mountains and running some trails. We're going to hit the road with this LTJK, and we're going to go 1,000 miles. We're going to go from Las Vegas to Salt Lake, drive around Salt Lake, and then come back. We're going to log things like economy and drivability. This is an 8-speed LT L86, that's the truck engine, and it's an early one. It's like a 15, maybe a 14, but I think it's a 15. So here we are in our first fill-up. This Jeep isn't terribly heavy. It does have some heavy bumpers, but the tires aren't that big, so I'm hoping for some good economy. I do have active fuel management enabled so that we have 4-cylinder mode. The grill is a little bit blocked, as you can see, but it's a pretty cool day out, so we'll see how the temperatures run. Now, I've had guys complain with V8s and even with V6s, they're only getting 200, 250 miles per tank, but that's usually guys with 40s and 1 tons and a lot of drag. So I'm hoping to get close to 300 miles on a tank out of this one, and a lot of that's going to depend how I drive. So I intend to do some of the legs on the trip at the speed limit and then some maybe a little bit slower, and we'll just do some comparisons on drag. Jeep says anything over 65 miles per hour decreases fuel economy, so maybe we can even check for that. We are putting premium in this vehicle because it's an LT L86. Now, I get a lot of questions. Can you run regular in the L86? At one point, and maybe even now, GM said that you can. And here's my experience watching Knock Retard. If your Jeep is light, you're under a light load, you're just cruising around at sea level, regular works fine. But if you put it under a heavy load, it's a hot day out, you're up at altitude, you're towing a trailer, just use some common sense and put a higher grade fuel in it. You might even go to a medium grade or premium, but that's just something you have to test for yourself. I remember when I did the Super Chips tuners in the early days in the 3.8 JKs and I put the high octane tunes in, the things just knocked like crazy and I lost fuel economy. So these are much more sophisticated. They have ultra fast knock sensors, and they can actually retard knock on each individual cylinder. So each individual cylinder is like a 1-cylinder engine where fuel and spark is independent. Of course, they're linked together, so there's commonalities, but at the end of the day, use common sense. If you're going to be under a heavy load at high altitude, crawling when it's 100 degrees out, use the better gas. You don't want to damage your engine. You got to remember, this engine is over 11-to-1 compression. Even an LS3 is 10.7, and the Hemis are less than 11-to-1. I think they're 10.9. So you're really pushing the envelope if you run really poor grade fuel under high load conditions in this particular engine. The LT 5.3 does run on regular, and like the 6-liter, it has less compression and is designed for the lower grade fuel. So if you want to run regular in an LT, the L83 is probably the engine you want to get. So we're going to finish up here and hit the road. Alright, so we're going to monitor our fuel economy in several different ways. Now here we are with the engine not running, and you can see that the dash says 10 miles to the gallon and our trip B has been set to 0. Now these things are notoriously off, and part of the problem is the speedometer. If your speedometer is not calibrated correctly, then these values are going to be off too. You can spend some time and calibrate your speedometer accurately, and then these values are pretty close. But they're not as accurate as with this app. As you can see, this app uses GPS for positioning vehicle speed. It also takes into account the weather. So on top of this app, and by the way, this app is called Ulysses Speedometer. It's on Android. I'm not sure if Apple has it. We're also going to use torque. And you guys know I'm a big fan of torque. And one of the things it can do is check your miles per gallon. Now we have it set here for average miles per gallon and for instant miles per gallon. So when the AFM kicks in, I can actually see that value jump up. And by the way, I did a video a while ago. If you look in the top left corner, you see AFR, air fuel ratio, and it doesn't matter if you're measuring lambda or there's other ways of measuring the air fuel ratio. I'm just using AFR here because I know that about 14.7 to 1 is pure gasoline, stoichiometric. 14.2 has about 10% alcohol in it. So I can tell if we're in a mode other than closed loop. Closed loop meaning the oxygen sensors are controlling the fuel delivery. There's several open loop modes like cold start, deceleration fuel cutoff. But one of the ones we're concerned about is performance enrichment. And performance enrichment will take it out of closed loop, running off the O2s. Now, it'll come back to the O2s and check them, but it fattens the motor up when it's under a heavy load. And one of the big problems that guys have is they don't know they're in open loop. They're going up a grade, and they're giving it some throttle to go 80 miles an hour, and they're at 11.5, 12 to 1 air-fuel ratio. Where if they had backed off just a little bit, got it in the closed loop, ran off the O2s, they could have kicked that up to 14.5, 14.6 to 1, and got a lot better economy. In fact, I had a guy in Salt Lake that told me he improved his mileage almost 3 miles to the gallon by watching going between open loop and closed loop. It had 40s, heavy JK, etc. So you might want to get this app. It's essentially free. There is a pay version that has some additional, in fact, you can get enhanced GM PIDs with the paid version, but it's only $5. The adapter is about $10, so I highly recommend it. You can see here at the bottom, I'm looking at the O2s. The upstreams, which are on the top there, are the most critical. They are used mainly for fuel control. The rear O2s are used for catalytic converter monitoring and backup fuel control and some other things. But by watching your O2 sensors, it can tell you a lot. If you're flatlined up or down, that means you're lean or rich. It's going to be flatlined lean when you're in deceleration fuel cutoff because there's no fuel going into the motor. It's going to be flatlined rich when you're in performance enrichment at the top because you're just dumping fuel into it. What you want to see is a sine wave. You want to see an AC up and down sine wave. And I'll see if I can get some video of that. The voltage on the top right is also important because these GM systems, and especially the Jeep system, likes to run above 12.5, 13 volts. I like to see it 13.5 to 14 volts. Early on with the LTs, we couldn't control the voltage. There was no provision in the tuner to control the voltage, and GM uses a generic module to control their voltage. So now we do have control of the voltage, and we've kicked it up, and it does seem to make things run better. The GM side can handle wide voltage fluctuations. In fact, some of the OE vehicles were running down in the low 12s and as high as 15, and customers were freaked out, and they took it to the dealers because the gauges were accurate on the dash. Well, GM had to dumb the gauge down just like Chrysler does because it was costing a lot of money to replace alternators that weren't bad. GM monitors the health of the battery and knows when they can bring the voltage back or kick it up. Problem with that running it in a JK is the JK system doesn't like that. The JK system doesn't like those wide fluctuations. It likes to keep the voltage up around 14 based on temperature. So let's hit the road. So I kind of screwed up and reset the app, which reset the mileage back to 0. The app and the speedometer were reading a little bit off. Not much, just a couple of miles. So what we'll do is, you can see we're at 35.4 miles into the trip. The speedometer is still pegged on full. I find that they stay on full till about 50. We're going to do this first leg at 70 miles an hour. You can see that the speedometer is off. I've got the cruise control set at 70, and it's indicating 68. So we're reading a little bit less on the odometer than we probably should be. We have to kick that up. I will say, I've been in 4-cylinder mode for over half the time up till this point, but we haven't gone that far. All right, so we're bombing along here. We've gone about 80 something miles. It says 78 miles, but the speedometer is off. We're going about 70 right now, and you can see it's indicating about 68. We're about 1800 RPM. You can see our mileage. Right now we're a V8 is averaging 15, 16, 17. When we turn into a 4-cylinder, which, like I mentioned earlier, I've been in 4-cylinder mode quite a bit, and let's hope it goes into 4-cylinder mode. We've been going up this little grade. The mileage on the dash increased from 10 miles per gallon even to 11.6. I think we're going to be kicking into a 4-cylinder here. Let's watch what happens to that instant miles per gallon. You can see that the load is coming off as the mileage goes up, but we're still a V8. The gauge is at about an 1/8 under full. A little bit disappointing. I usually like to get about 100 miles by then, but we're at about 85 right now. By the way, guys, these road trips are just amazing, especially especially through places like Utah and Nevada. The scenery is spectacular. We're coming up on Mesquite here. All right, we just turned into a 4-cylinder. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but you can see that the mileage, well, we went back into a V8 for a second. Now we're back into a 4-cylinder. So you can see we're averaging about just over 20 miles to the gallon in the 4-cylinder mode, which is pretty darn good. We're not going to be able to use the app for distance tracking because every time the phone rings, it resets. So I pretty much gave up on that. What we're going to do is we're going to GPS this odometer and then figure a ratio out and apply that, and then we'll use actual calculated values to get the economy when we get to the gas station. Interesting page here. Notice our voltage on the top left is running about 14. Our trims are plus or minus 5. Those long-term fuel trims tell you a lot. They are the final culmination of everything in the operating system working right together. You want them to be as close to 0 as you can get it, but it's rare they're ever going to be at 0. But you can see we're running pretty much under 5%, so I'm happy with that. You can see our air-fuel ratio is at 14.7. That means we're running close to pure gasoline. We're not in performance enrichment. We're not open loop. You can see our O2 sensors, the upstreams, switching pretty good. Now, you're starting to see them flatline a little, and that's because we're going between 4 and 8-cylinder mode. We're going into the Virgin Gorge right now. It's really beautiful out here. It rained and it's all green. Now, the right O2s are flatline. Those are monitoring the catalytic converters, and that's what you want to see. You want to see that lower amplitude. If we go here, you can see our intake temps are good. Now, the tranny temps in this vehicle has been running really cool. Like, I haven't seen it go over 125, 128 degrees. And I'm pretty sure this guy is running our auxiliary cooler. And if he is, that would explain it. As you know, knock retard is really important to monitor. And I do see it come in every once in a while. So we might be able to kick a little more knock into, or a little more spark into this operating system. And that's one of the reasons I do these test drives, to push the limits and see how far we can go. Coolant temp's running about 210, 215. And the fan is not running. These fans don't usually get driven up by GM until about 225, 226 degrees, or if the air conditioning pressure is higher than 200, or if transmission temperature exceeds 175 to 180 degrees. So we haven't exceeded any of that, and the fan's just basically off. And when I tell you guys how important it is to let air into that grill, you want that air stream going into the grill and cooling your engine. You don't want the fan trying to suck it in from the other side. So keep that grill unblocked. Oil temp is a calculated value, so just take that with a grain of salt. They always read high, I'm not sure why. We also offer an engine oil cooler if you guys are interested. If you have a heavy Jeep with 40s, it's probably a good idea. If you have a light Jeep, it probably doesn't matter that much. You want to get as much off-board cooling as you can. What I mean by that is, anything that you put in front of the radiator, whether it's an AC condenser, transmission cooler, you're just pushing that hot air into the radiator, then the engine compartment. By off-boarding this engine oil and transmission fluid, it not only cools the transmission and the engine oil, but it gets that heat out of the front of the grill and out of the engine compartment and into the atmosphere. And we find that these rail coolers really work well. You can see our AC pressures at 72 psi, 70 psi. That's because the AC is not on. So we're going through the Virgin Gorge right now, and I can feel it kicking in and out of 4-cylinder mode. We're in a 4-cylinder right now. It's really not that obtrusive. I think I would leave it active in this Jeep because I've probably been running in 4-cylinder mode about half the time. So we'll see what the end result is. We've gone over 100 miles and we haven't hit a quarter of a tank yet. I find that the first quarter or the last quarter of the fuel gauge, that's from 3/4 to full, always moves the slowest. And then as you get near half, it accelerates and then starts to drop off pretty quickly towards empty. I think back in the 70s, the Virgin Gorge was one of the most expensive highway projects per mile the U.S. had ever done because of the terrain. We had valleys, we had solid rock. It was a really tough project. This actual part of land is Arizona, and I don't know how Arizona got compensated for that because most of the traffic on the 15 goes from Nevada up into Utah. But it's an interesting place. Cedar Pocket right here is pretty cool. They got some campsites and stuff, and you can actually walk right down to the lake. Make sure you wear some shoes because they got some pretty sharp cactuses and stuff around here. So we'll be back, probably gonna blow right through St. George Hurricane, get up through Cedar City. We'll see where we're at on the mileage at that point. So earlier I missed Logandale, but back a ways, and I'll try to catch it on the way back, is a place called Logandale, and it's an amazing place to wheel. I used to wheel there many years ago, actually decades ago. I went to the first, was it Hump and Bumps? Some of the first events they had back there around 2010, 2011. I'd go there, I'd be on a trail with 10, 12 other guys, 50, 100 guys would show up. It was pretty cool. I'm told, now I haven't been there for a lot of years, but I'm told over 6,000 Jeeps showed up at the last Hump and Bump. And it really is a mini Moab. They kind of call it mini Moab for a reason, and I can see that place growing. Now, that's in Nevada. As we get up here into Utah, we're going to pass Sandy Valley, and St. George has a lot of really cool wheeling, but Sandy Valley has become kind of a hot spot. And when we get up near Hurricane, I'll point that out to you. St. George went through the crash in 2008 just like Las Vegas, and it has recovered now. It's really booming just like Las Vegas is. However, I wouldn't live here, and it's not because of the people, it's because of the environment. We did the nuclear testing up in northern Nevada, and unfortunate for the residents here, the winds were blowing in a direction that brought that radioactive material down to St. George, and the incidence of cancer and other diseases are really high here, even to this day. On this first leg of the drive, as you can see, we're going to average about 70 miles an hour. I want to try to keep that pretty consistent, and as we get up outside of Cedar City, that speed limit's going to increase to about 80 miles an hour. You can see our miles per gallon now has come up to 12.3. We're just a hair over 3/4, and we've gone 122 miles, which is really about 130 miles. So again, that's seems like it's going to be pretty good, but that gauge is going to start dropping quick when it hits a half a tank. So my goal here is that we can push 300 miles out of this thing. And what you have to consider is this vehicle, while I'm driving it like a baby carriage, is no slouch. This vehicle is quick. This vehicle will outrun an LS3. This vehicle will outrun most of the standard Hemis. And the LT1, especially when it's tuned, will outrun most of the 500 horse crate motors. So when we talk about economy, trying to get better mileage than the V6, you have to keep in mind that we have about double the horsepower, actually more than double the horsepower on the 3.8. This vehicle does have an 8-speed, but as you know, the new 10 speeds are on the road, and we're going from a 4-speed. This vehicle was a late model JK, so it was a 5-speed to a 10-speed. We're literally doubling the amount of forward gears. And then when you combine that, of course, with what I've talked about over and over, the high compression, direct injection, and the CVVT, a lot of guys don't give that enough credit. Being able to control that cam and cylinder pressure really is the key to everything that this motor does. You can think of it like the heart. You can think of the computer as the brain. You can think of the compression as the muscle, but you can think of the camshaft as the heart of the engine. The really game-changing thing that Chrysler did back in 2007 was offering that 4-door Jeep. And by the way, I have yacked enough, and here's the Hurricane off-ramp, and down there is Sandy Valley, and there's a little lake out there. It's a really nice place. Phil Howell, the ex-editor of Four-Wheel Drive Magazine or Sport Utility, whatever it is, used to live out here. He still might be an editor, I don't know. But getting back to Jeeping, when Chrysler took the TJ to the LJ, they made a statement, and that was, guys need more room. Now, the Europeans and the South Africans and the Australians never really considered the Jeep a good expedition vehicle for a lot of reasons. It didn't hold a lot of gas, didn't have a lot of room, couldn't put all your equipment in the back of a TJ. Now, they went to the LJ, and that helped a little bit, adding that room. But when they went to the JK, it changed everything. Now you got 4 doors, you can stuff your family in it, or a ton of equipment. Now we do have a proper expedition vehicle. Another genius move was keeping the live axles and going to coil springs. Keeping the live axles is pretty obvious. They're about the most durable thing you can do off-road, and they're relatively economical. Not only are the live axles sturdy, easy to service, But if you do want to upgrade to 40s, raise the Jeep up, it's easy. It's not like independent suspension where you got to deal with all that geometry. Single axle swaps have been popular for a long time. I used to do them on Toyotas, and taking the independent suspension off and all the hokey stuff it's got going on. And yeah, I mean, you can run independent suspension. There's racing suspensions that are independent, and they're awesome. But really, if you're going to go out and beat the crap out of your Jeep in the middle of nowhere, you want a live axle. Going to the coil springs made them ride better. The earlier leaf spring driven live axle suspensions, and of course I'm talking about body on frame construction. I know Land Rover and others now are doing the unitized bodies, and I guess there's nothing wrong with that, but just having a full frame with live axles, in my opinion, is what I would choose to cross the desert. So you can literally just raise your Jeep up by putting spacers under the springs or getting some taller spring. It's a setup that has a lot of potential. And if you go to 40s and you increase the load, you can just upgrade to a 60 or a 14 volt or a 70 or an 80, whatever you want. It's just available to you. So the combination of the 4 doors, more interior room to store stuff, made the JK a true family SUV vehicle that you can use for expedition. And therein lies part of the problem with the JK. All right, let me pause a second and say we used just about a quarter of a tank to go from northwest Las Vegas to the outside of Hurricane, and we've gone about 140 miles. So getting back to the JK, and you guys don't have to listen to me ramble if you don't want. Go ahead and fast forward to the end and let's see how this thing ends up. So Jeep created this awesome vehicle that could cross deserts, live axles. It's solid, it's strong. It doesn't have 72 modules like a Land Rover or a Mercedes GL. It doesn't cost $200,000. You can buy one of these things in the $25,000 range back in the day. You could buy a Rubicon for $30,000. It was an instant hit. They've sold over 1 million JKs, and I know they're going to be selling a ton of the JLs. Where did it fail? The engine. Guys load these things down, they put their tires on. I actually took my 09 Rubicon when it was brand new from Vegas to New York, and we took this exact trail, and it was one of the most miserable trips I ever took. My wife kept asking me, why are all these other cars passing you? She would reach over and push up on the cruise control stalk, but it wouldn't go any faster. The transmission would downshift, the engine would rev up to 4,000 or 5,000 RPM, thought it would stick a leg out of bed, and for you non-hot rodder guys, that means throw a rod. I was nervous about it. I kept backing off the speed. I had a tuner with me, the Super Chips, trying to get better performance out of it, but the entire trip was a failure. When we got back to Las Vegas, and this was in 2009, early 2009, my wife said, "You're selling this vehicle. I won't drive it," because I did buy it for her, and we were going to have a couple of kids, and we had a Toyota, I had a Toyota Hilux that had a LS in it, a 2007 LH6, and I love my Toyota, and I still have it today. Problem with it is it's a 2-door, and you can't really raise kids or drive them around in that vehicle. So we bought the JK, and I really liked it. I took it off-road. I can say there wasn't anything else that fit me better. I tried the 4Runner, I couldn't see out of it. I looked at the GL wagon, but it was massively expensive. I looked at the Land Rovers, independent suspension, problems with the air springs. So the JK was where it was at for me. And that's when I decided, well, JK is a perfect vehicle, it just needs a better engine. Now at the time we were working on AEV stuff. We had customers with AEV conversions, and they did a great job in the day. In 2009, 2010, the Hemi was king. It had been put into the JK by Dan over at Burnsville and by AEV and some others, and it took that little 3.8 and took it up to the next level. However, we were still burdened with that 545 RFE transmission, which was absolutely terrible, and it did no justice for the Hemi engine. The Hemi engine was large and iron, so it kind of sat up high and put some weight in front of the axle, and that changed vehicle dynamics. You had to change the suspension out, put some heavier springs in it. At the time, we didn't have a whole lot of cooling system options because we had the little DC brushed 3.8 cooling fan. It's about as big of a fan motor as you can get. There really weren't the modern pulse width modulated 19-inch fan blades out at the time with the Outrunners. So it was somewhat of a compromise. They would run hot under certain conditions. The transmissions had some timers. I said there has to be something better. So that's when I decided that I'm going to develop the LS. And I did. I had an 08 JK that I purchased for the project, and I had pioneered the LS conversion with the Toyotas earlier on. I started doing the Gen 4 conversions in 2007, right after the Gen 4 was released. Everybody said I was crazy, but they told me that all through my 30 years of engine conversion history. You can't do it. Like put a big block in a Honda 600. We'll talk about that someday. Talk about torque steer. Whenever the throttle was on, it would go straight. In any event, I put the Gen 4 in a couple of Toyotas. I think I did a pickup, and I learned a lot about the operating system and how to work with it. So when 2008 came along, we got a 2008 JK, put an LS 5.3 in it, and the rest is history. It fit like a glove. We didn't have to hack the firewall or bash it like the Hemi guys. We didn't have to move the steering shaft. The engine was about the same weight as the 3.8. It's an all aluminum engine, so we didn't have to mess with the suspension or the springs. Cooling was obviously better. It's an all aluminum engine, and it just in every way outperformed the Hemi, in my opinion. It had a 6-speed, modern, adaptive transmission that the 545 just could not compete with. So the rest was history. The hard part was, how do you integrate it into a Chrysler operating system when you have a GM powertrain and keep it legal? Remember, that was our goal from day one. It's easy to do things like take a LS engine and put it in front of a Chrysler transmission, but technically what you're doing is not legal. So we had a lot of goals to meet, and I think we did. And now you fast forward 10 years and look at what these LTs are doing. They're outperforming anything we did back then and anything else anybody else did back then.